Hey there, my name is Jay, and I'm one of 3 members that make up Real World Archon, an indie developer working on our first game, Clown Around. Clown Around is an immersive sim where you play as a clown set out on missions to prank specific targets, and you're given the freedom to do that however you want. Think of it like Hitman, except instead of executing your targets, you throw a pie at their face or something. Our game started development as part of the Pirate Software Game Jam 14, and we actually got the first place runner-up spot out of 1,400 entries in our first outing as a game development team. And in this video, I'll walk you through how we did that. So day 1 of the jam, the first order of business was finding out what the theme is and then deciding what our game was gonna be.
Your theme is It's Spreading. The theme is It's Spreading. You voted on it. That's your vote.
Now, since the theme was announced, we were able to hop into Discord and start cooking. First, we made a list of things off the top of our head that could spread, and then we started throwing out ideas, like a game about spreading disease and neurosis, a shooter about spreading peanut butter on bread-based enemies, or maybe a game about spreading misinformation. But then, one of us came up with the winning idea: a game about spreading happiness. Aww. Then, one of us followed up by suggesting it's a stealth game where you prank people by throwing pies or popping balloons, and that's where the idea of making a clown game was born. The rest of the team had positive reactions to the idea, and just like that, our concept was finalized. A clown immersive sim about sneaking around, pranking people, and spreading chaos. Before I go further, I should mention that we did all of the programming for our game in the Godot game engine. I used Blender for all of the 3D modeling, and we all used Sprite for texturing and art. For the game, the first thing that we got set up was a basic controller so that the player can actually move around and do simple navigation. We even added these beautiful and atmospheric footsteps. Shortly after adding these footsteps though, focus testing showed that players thought that they were grating and sounded like dying animals. So we made the executive decision to tone them down. Bit of a downgrade if you ask us, but that's what the players wanted. After that, we set up a basic play space to navigate around in using that character controller, and we did it in a program called Trench Broom, which is actually used mostly for making Quake maps, but using a plugin called Godot, you can actually import Trench Broom levels and then use them in-engine. Next, we got a basic inventory system going where you could pick up items, swap between them, and use them. While the guys worked on that, my job was getting the model for our NPC made. Prior to this game jam, I had no experience with 3D modeling, so what I did was I would reference projects on Sketchfab for inspiration on how to create low poly models, and then I used that inspiration to make this guy. Look at him go. Isn't he just beautiful? As you can see, the first attempt at pathfinding for the NPC was a little bit rough, but after some tinkering, we got him walking around. Now we just needed to teach him what walls are. For this next iteration, we tweaked the navigation mesh and the pathfinding script. We also set up waypoints throughout the level to give the NPCs a much needed sense of direction. It all started to seem like it was finally coming together. Now that the NPCs weren't grinding their face against the wall anymore, we thought it would be a good idea to see how they navigated in groups. It honestly worked surprisingly well. As soon as we let them roam freely, you can see that they decided to organize a wholesome group pissing session. A few of the other things that we got added in the first few days was making the clown horn usable, creating a basic jump, and making the first interactable object, which is a printer that you can scan your ass on. We also messed around with some visual effects, like adding dithering to give the game a textured and retro look, and we also tested out a basic lighting system, but the results left a lot to be desired. So, after just a few days, we managed to get a pretty solid foundation set up, but there was a lot more to be done before this got anywhere close to being an actual game. At this point, we were approaching the halfway point of the jam, and morale was starting to decline a bit. We all work full-time, and as soon as we got off, we would just work on the game until we passed out, basically. The lack of sleep was taking its toll, and we still didn't have most of the key features of the game even implemented yet. The first of those key features that we did implement was giving NPCs the ability to see. They each have a vision cone, and then we set it so that the walls would block their vision, otherwise they basically had wall hacks. Now that NPCs had the ability to see, we could start working on the guard enemy for the game. First, we set up a system where if an NPC sees you and then you do an action like honking your horn, it alerts them and then the security spawns a guard. Next, we got the first iteration of our guard enemy implemented. Once he spawns, as soon as he sees the player, he'll enter a chase state, and then whenever the player gets caught, it triggers the fail state and then makes a funny sound. After that, we got a noise level system made so that you can sneak around the guards and they can detect you even if you're behind them when you make any kind of sound, which is pretty funny because everything about being a clown is noisy. We also made it so that when the guard loses sight of the player, it starts a timer where they eventually go back to patrolling, that way the player has a way to escape from them. The last thing that we needed for the guard right now was a way to incapacitate them. So we created a mechanic where you spray them with water and it makes them wet so that when they try to tase you, they actually tase themselves instead. It's also worth mentioning that throughout this entire process, the game is constantly breaking and we're doing bug fixing on the fly. Some bugs are simple, some are funny, but sometimes they're like this. The next main mechanic that we worked on was NPC frustration and mood. Frustration is kind of like an NPC's health bar. When you play pranks on them, it increases their frustration, and then when it reaches max, they go into a frenzied state. Mood is more of a permanent value. Anytime you frustrate an NPC, it's going to chip away at their mood, and then depending on their mood level, the NPC can do different things like yelling at other NPCs, which in turn lowers their mood too. As you can imagine, this leads to a cascading effect where all the NPCs start getting really mad and yelling at each other, and this is what ties our game into the main theme of the game jam, it's spreading. And with that, we had the primary mechanics for the game working, but there was still a lot of ground for us to cover before the game was playable, and our time was starting to run out. We were approaching the final days of the game jam, and at this point, we were barely even alive. We still had so much to do and not enough time to do it, so we started crunching and getting the true game dev experience. One of the final mechanics we implemented was a dynamic music system, and at first we were going to use Godot's built-in interactive music functionality, but then we found out that it wasn't implemented yet. So we just went for an easy alternative, which was making layered tracks that fade in and out dynamically based on the current security level and whether or not the player was being chased. We got that mechanic finalized, then the last major system that we set up was the NPC scheduling system. Basically what we did was separate the day into timed blocks and then gave every NPC different tasks to perform and locations to go to depending on what the time was. At the end of the schedule, the game will end and then tally the player's score. With this system in place, we basically had a functioning game going. There was still a lot of work to be done tweaking and polishing the game, but at least we had it in a playable state. At least that's what we thought, until basically the entire game exploded. At the worst possible time, we ran into a severe game-breaking bug. For some unholy reason, 3D models would randomly swap into something else completely. The NPCs' heads would turn into flowers, desks turned into urinal troughs, doors became filing cabinets. It was honestly kinda funny. But at the same time, we were in a complete panic. We weren't even sure if we would be able to fix it before the deadline, which means we might not even be able to submit. But luckily, after hours of screaming and crying, we found out what happened. It wasn't even anything we were doing wrong, but an issue on Godot's end where the project files had been corrupted. Thank you, Godot. Now that we had all of that sorted, it was time for the final push. In the final hours of the game jam, we went into maximum overdrive, finishing and polishing as much of the game as possible, and in that time, we managed to finish doors, posters, special NPCs, picking up cups, spawning animations, custom events, slipping on bananas, sitting, restricted areas, a completed main menu, headshots, a fleshed out UI, and a microwave poop explosion. You might also be asking yourself, what was I doing this whole time? Well, basically during the entire process of the game jam, I was just in the Blender mines, making as many models as possible to populate the game and make things look nice. Finally, combining the work that I did with the work that the guys did, it took our game from looking like this to this. And with that, our time was up. We were satisfied with where the game was at, so we got it exported and entered the final version into the game jam submissions. We did it. Our game was finally finished and submitted, so now all we had to do was sit and wait for the results. We didn't really know what to expect, but we were pleasantly surprised when we saw that our game was steadily climbing up the popularity charts of the game jam. People were giving us really positive feedback, and it felt awesome to see people enjoying what we had made. It was really encouraging, and we started to get really excited to see the results. Unfortunately, due to the unexpected volume of submissions, they actually had to delay the results for the game jam by an additional 2 weeks. So now our wait time was doubled and the anticipation was building even more. Then finally, after almost a month of waiting, the day had arrived where Pirate Software got on stream to reveal the winners of the game jam and play the games on stream. Unfortunately, again, for some reason the VOD of this stream was lost, and the only piece of footage we were able to salvage from it was this.
Okay. This is why Clown Around is good.
An absolutely rave review from Pirate Software himself. Shortly after that, we found out that our game was one of the top 10 submissions, and that felt great. We were all relatively new to the world of game jams, and our first outing as a team, we managed to get one of the top 10 spots among thousands of entries. We were super proud of ourselves, and due to the overwhelmingly positive reaction to our game, we made the decision to continue working on Clown Around and build it into a fully fledged game. Fast forward to today, and our game is looking much better. We've implemented a ton of new features, and we're really excited to keep working. Our Steam page is live right now, and you can go over there to watch our reveal trailer that we just put out and read more about the game. We hope you enjoyed this recap of our experience with the Pirate Software Game Jam. If you want, please go check out Clown Around on Steam and give us a wish list. It helps us out a ton, and we look forward to seeing how people like our game once it's finished.